Lily Dawson had always lived with a sense of loss she couldn't fully understand. Growing up, her memories of her early childhood were hazy, and the stories others told her about that time seemed distant, like they belonged to someone else. The most vivid memory she had was of the scars on her arms and legs. Everyone said it was because she had survived a fire when she was just a little girl, but she couldn't remember the flames, the smoke, or the screams. Her mind was blank about that night. When Lily was only 5 years old, she was told that her parents had died in a terrible fire. The family home, an old creaky house on the edge of town, was burned to the ground, leaving nothing behind but ashes. But somehow, Lily had been pulled from the wreckage. They said someone had carried her out just in time. It was a miracle, they claimed. She had been rushed to the hospital with burns and smoke inhalation, but she survived. Lily had no memory of what happened. Her aunt, who took her in after the fire, told her that she should never dwell on the past. "The past can hurt, but it's gone now," her aunt would say, rushing away the dark cloud of questions that seemed to follow Lily wherever she went. She was raised in a small town with kind people, but no one ever spoke much about her parents, and no one asked too many questions about the fire. It was as if everyone had agreed it was better left forgotten. But Lily couldn't forget. She often had nightmares. They came in the form of flashes, sharp, vivid images of a house burning, crackling with heat and smoke, and a dark figure moving in the shadows. She couldn't explain it, but those images always felt real. They felt like memories, even though she knew they couldn't be. As she grew older, Lily's questions about that night became more urgent. Her scars, though faded now, were still a part of her. She had learned to live with the reminders of that fire, but the unanswered questions about how she had survived haunted her. Why had no one ever explained what happened to her parents? Why was she the only one to make it out? Why couldn't she remember? Lily did her best to focus on the present. She went to school, made friends, and later, she went to college and became a journalist. But the past, with all its unanswered mysteries, never stopped nagging at her. She buried it deep inside, pushing away the need for answers. One day, after finishing a report on a local arson investigation, Lily sat down with Detective Greg McConnell, an old investigator who had been on the force for over 30 years. He was a quiet man, but there was something about his demeanor that made Lily feel like he knew more than he let on. They talked about the increasing number of fires around the region, many of which seemed suspicious. As their conversation shifted to past cases, McConnell's face grew serious when she mentioned the fire that had taken her parents. He became uncomfortably quiet, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Lily noticed his reaction, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "You know something about the fire, don't you?" McConnell hesitated, then sighed deeply. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's something I've never told you, Lily," he said. "Something about the fire that took your parents." Lily's heart raced. She sat up straighter, feeling a mix of dread and anticipation. "What do you mean?" He looked at her with a strange mixture of sympathy and concern. "I worked that case, but it was never fully closed. There are things that didn't add up, things I could never explain." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. For years, everyone had told her the fire was an accident. Now, McConnell was suggesting there was more to the story. "Tell me everything," Lily demanded, her voice trembling. McConnell took a long pause, his eyes darting to the door, as if making sure no one else could hear. Then he spoke in a hushed tone. "Your parents' death wasn't an accident. There was something off about that fire, something that didn't make sense even to me." Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. The questions she had buried for so long were rising to the surface, demanding answers. What had really happened that night? And why had no one ever told her the truth? As McConnell began to speak, Lily knew her life was about to change forever. The haunting mystery of the fire was only just beginning to unravel, and she couldn't stop herself from wanting to know everything. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Detective McConnell's words echoed in her mind as she sat at her small kitchen table later that evening. Your parents' death wasn't an accident. She could hardly believe it. For years, she had been told that it was just a tragic fire, something that could happen to anyone. But now, McConnell was suggesting there was something darker at play. What had really happened that night? Determined to uncover the truth, Lily spent the next few days searching for answers. She began by going through the old records she had on the fire. She had never bothered to look closely at them before. They had always seemed like just a part of her past that couldn't be changed. But now, everything felt different. She had to know what had really happened. The first thing Lily did was visit the local police department. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find, but she knew she had to start somewhere. The police records on the fire should be public, she thought. The fire had happened many years ago, and it was one of the most talked about events in the town's history. Surely there had to be something there. She walked into the small, quiet office and approached the front desk. The officer behind the counter gave her a polite smile, but Lily could tell he didn't expect much from her request. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. "I'm looking for the police report on the fire that destroyed the Dawson house years ago," Lily said, trying to sound casual. "It happened when I was a child." The officer's smile faded just a little. "The Dawson fire, huh?" he said slowly, glancing down at his computer. "I can check if we have those records for you." Lily waited while the officer typed away, but after a few moments he frowned. "It seems like the records are incomplete," he said, looking back at her. "There's no full report for the fire. It's just some brief notes." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean incomplete? How can there not be a full report on something that big?" "I don't know," the officer said with a shrug. "I'm sorry, but that's all we have here." Lily didn't know what to think. She had heard that some cases were lost or misplaced over time. But this felt different. She thanked the officer and left the station, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over her. It was like someone was hiding something. But who? And why? The next step in her search took her to the local courthouse. She knew she needed to dig deeper into her parents' case. If the police records were incomplete, maybe there were other documents, something more concrete, that could help her understand what had really happened. When Lily arrived at the courthouse, she felt a mix of hope and doubt. She made her way to the Public Records Department and asked to see any files related to the fire. The clerk behind the desk looked at her for a moment before pulling up a stack of papers. "This is all we have on file for the Dawson case," the clerk said, handing her a folder. Lily opened it quickly, but her heart sank when she saw the documents inside. They were nothing like what she expected. The papers were vague and disjointed, filled with scattered notes and incomplete sentences. Some pages even looked like they had been torn out. One thing stood out, though. There was a brief mention of an investigation into suspicious circumstances, but there was no follow-up. The more Lily looked through the file, the more she realized that none of the details added up. The timeline didn't make sense, and there were multiple mentions of unknown causes for the fire. It was like someone had deliberately erased key pieces of information. Her hands were shaking as she carefully placed the papers back into the folder. Lily didn't know what to think. There was clearly something wrong here, but she had no idea what it was. She had to find out more, no matter what it took. As she was about to leave, something caught her eye. A small slip of paper tucked between two old records. It was a handwritten note with a phone number scrawled on it. The name on the note was Gregory Hall, followed by the words, "Talk to him. He knows the truth." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Gregory Hall. She didn't recognize the name, but the message was clear. Someone knew something. Someone who had to be connected to the fire. The note was a lead, one that could finally take her closer to the truth. With a sense of urgency, Lily pulled out her phone and dialed the number. She didn't know who Gregory Hall was, but she was about to find out. Lily couldn't believe the slip of paper she had found. The phone number and the name Gregory Hall seemed to burn into her mind. She didn't know who he was or how he was connected to the fire, But there was no way she was going to let this chance slip away. She had to find out what he knew. With her hands trembling, Lily dialed the number. The phone rang several times before a voice answered, deep and gravelly. "Hello." Lily's heart raced. "Is this Gregory Hall?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," the voice replied. "Who's asking?" "My name is Lily Dawson. I found your name in some old records," Lily explained. "It was connected to a fire. The one that destroyed my family's house when I was a child. I think you know something about it. Can we talk?" There was a long silence on the other end. For a moment, Lily thought he might hang up, but then the voice spoke again, quieter now, as if reluctant. "I know about the fire, but it's dangerous for you to dig into this. It's been years. It's better to leave it alone." Lily felt a knot in her stomach. "I can't just leave it alone. I'd spent my whole life wondering what really happened that night. I need to know the truth. Please, you have to tell me." Gregory Hall hesitated, and for a moment, Lily thought he might refuse to speak. But then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Meet me tomorrow. I'll tell you what you need to know. But be careful. There are people who don't want you to find out." Lily agreed to meet him, arranging a time and place at a small, out-of-the-way diner on the edge of town. She spent the rest of the evening in a mix of excitement and dread. What was Gregory Hall going to tell her? What had he meant by "there are people who don't want you to find out"? Was someone trying to keep her from learning the truth about her parents' death? The next day, Lily arrived at the diner early. She was nervous, but her determination to find answers pushed her forward. The small building was quiet, with just a few people scattered at the booths. She sat at a table near the back, constantly glancing at the door. At exactly the time they had agreed on, a man in his mid-50s walked into the diner. He had graying hair and a tired expression, but his eyes were sharp. Lily recognized him from the records she had seen earlier, Gregory Hall. He was wearing a faded jacket, and he scanned the room before his gaze landed on her. Without a word, he walked over and sat down across from her. "Lily Dawson, huh?" he said, his voice still low and cautious. "I didn't think anyone would still care about that fire after all these years." Lily leaned forward. "I have to know what happened. I was told my parents died in a fire, but everything I've learned tells me it wasn't an accident. I need you to tell me what you know." Gregory took a deep breath, his eyes flickering to the window, as if making sure no one was watching. "All right," he said quietly. "But you need to understand, this isn't just some old mystery. This fire was a cover-up. It wasn't an accident, and your parents weren't just innocent victims. They were involved in something much bigger, something dangerous." Lily's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" Gregory looked at her seriously. "Your parents were mixed up with a criminal organization. They weren't just living a quiet life. They were involved in something shady, something that got them in over their heads. The fire was set to destroy everything. They wanted to make sure there were no traces left of their past." Lily felt a wave of shock wash over her. "My parents were criminals." "No, that can't be right. They were good people. They loved me." Gregory's eyes softened. "I know it's hard to believe, but that's the truth. Your parents were trying to escape the life they had gotten involved in, but it was too late. The fire wasn't meant to kill you. They needed to erase everything, and you were supposed to be left behind. But someone important, saved you. That's why you survived." Lily's mind was spinning. This was the last thing she had expected to hear. Her parents, people she had always thought of as loving and kind, had been mixed up with dangerous criminals. It didn't make sense. But Gregory's words were starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle she had been trying to solve her whole life. "Who saved me?" she, almost in a whisper. Gregory hesitated before answering. "I don't know. I never found out. But I know whoever it was had to be close to your family. They didn't want you to die that night." Lily felt her head swim. Her parents passed, hidden away in a sea of lies, was slowly coming to light. But there were still so many questions. Who had saved her? Why? And most importantly, what had really happened that night? Gregory stood up, his expression dark. "You're playing with fire, Lily," he said, his voice tense. "I've already told you too much. You need to stop. These people, they won't stop looking for you." Lily sat in the diner long after Gregory Hall left, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about her past was unraveling. Her parents, people she had always believed were just victims of a tragic accident, were involved in something much darker, something criminal. And yet there was so much more to the story that Gregory hadn't told her. Who had saved her? Why had they let her live when her parents had died? She stared at the empty cup in front of her, barely noticing when the waitress came by to refill it. Lily wasn't even sure what to do next. She couldn't stop now. She had already come too far, and there were too many unanswered questions. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this journey could be. Gregory had warned her to stop digging, but she couldn't. The truth was calling to her. Lily decided to go back to the records at the courthouse. She needed to find out more, anything that could help her understand her parents' secret life. She had to know who they were before the fire, before everything changed. There had to be something there, something she hadn't found yet. The next morning, Lily returned to the courthouse, determined to dig deeper. This time, she was more focused. She knew she needed to look beyond the fire reports and the police files. What about her birth records? Could they give her any clues about her parents' past? Lily headed straight for the records department, her mind set. She approached the desk and smiled at the clerk. "I'd like to see my birth records, please," she said. "I know it's a bit unusual, but I think there might be something in there that could help me." The clerk raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "All right, give me a moment." Lily waited, her stomach twisting in knots. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling this was where everything would finally come together. When the clerk returned with a file, Lily took it carefully and opened it on the counter. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw what was inside. There, at the top of the page, was her name, followed by the names of her parents, David and Claire Dawson. But what shocked her was the next part. Under father, the name listed wasn't David Dawson. It was someone else, an unfamiliar name, a name she had never heard before. Lily's hands trembled as she read further. The birth certificate listed her father as Marcus Greaves. She didn't know that name either, but there it was, clear as day. Why had her father's name been changed? And who was this Marcus Greaves? She quickly took the file back to the clerk. "I'm sorry," Lily said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but there seems to be a mistake. This doesn't match the records I've seen before. Could you double-check it for me?" The clerk looked at her, confused. "There's no mistake. That's the record we have on file. It's all been verified. Are you sure you're looking at the right one?" Lily didn't know what to say. How could her birth records be wrong? Or was this another lie, another piece of her past that had been hidden from her? She left the courthouse feeling more lost than ever. Who was Marcus Greaves, and why had her father's name been changed? She didn't know how she was going to uncover the answers, but she knew she had to. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of lies, and Lily wasn't going to stop until she found it. As she walked to her car, Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Her eyes darted around, but there was no one in sight. Still, the sensation wouldn't leave. Whoever had tried to keep her from the truth wasn't giving up easily. She got into her car and drove home, her thoughts racing. The name Marcus Greaves felt like a key, but she didn't know what door it would open. She had no idea who this man was, but she was about to find out. The next step was clear. She needed to search for Marcus Greaves. Whoever he was tied to her past, and it was time to learn everything she could about him. The investigation was growing more dangerous by the minute, but Lily couldn't turn back. She had come too far. The truth was waiting for her, and she was going to find it, no matter what it took. Lily couldn't stop thinking about the name Marcus Greaves. It felt like a key to her past, a missing piece that could explain everything. The fire, her parents' hidden life, and why no one had told her the truth. But who was he? Why was his name in her birth records instead of her father's? The more she thought about it, the more questions piled up, and the more determined she became to find out who this man really was. The next morning, Lily sat down at her computer and began her search. She typed in Marcus Greaves over and over, but all she found were vague references to a few people with that name. None of them seemed to be connected to her family. She searched through social media, local records, and even news articles, but nothing stood out. It was as if this man had never existed, at least not in any public record. But she knew he had to be real. Her birth certificate had proven that. Lily decided to visit the town library. It was an old, dusty building filled with books and newspapers from decades past. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, she could find a mention of Marcus Greaves in some old newspaper article or town record. The library was quiet as she walked through the aisles, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She headed straight to the microfilm reader, where old newspapers were stored. She spent hours scanning through local papers from the time before the fire, hoping to find something that could lead her to Marcus Greaves. She found stories about the Dawson family, how they had lived in the area for years, and how they had always been well-liked in the community. There were no mentions of criminal activity, no signs that her parents had anything to hide. But then, just as she was about to give up, something caught her eye. An old article from over 2 decades ago appeared on the screen. The headline read, "Local businessman found dead in suspicious accident." Lily's heart skipped a beat. The name of the man in the article was Marcus Greaves. The report described how he had died in a car crash just a few weeks before the fire. It was ruled an accident, but the article also mentioned that the circumstances surrounding his death were mysterious. There was no follow-up on the case, and it seemed like the story had been quickly forgotten. Lily's mind raced as she read the article again. Could this be the same Marcus Greaves? And if so, how was he connected to her family? Had her parents known him? Or was there something even darker at play? She printed out the article and sat for a moment, trying to piece everything together. The crash had happened not long before the fire that destroyed her family's home. What if her parents had been involved in something related to Greaves' death? Was his death connected to the fire somehow? Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to the truth, but she still didn't know what it was. She needed more answers, more pieces of the puzzle. That evening, as she was going over the article at home, there was a knock at her door. Her heart leaked into her throat, and she cautiously made her way to the front door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Detective McConnell standing on the other side. He looked worn out, his eyes tired, but there was something urgent in his gaze. McConnell looked around, making sure no one else was in the vicinity. "I know what you've been doing," he said quietly. "And I need to warn you. The more you dig, the more dangerous this gets. There's a reason people wanted that fire to be forgotten. And it's not just about your parents. It's about a lot more than that." Lily stared at him, her pulse racing. "What are you trying to say? What aren't you telling me?" McConnell sighed and sat down. Marcus Greaves wasn't just some local businessman. He was involved in something much bigger, something illegal. And your parents, they were mixed up in it, too. That fire was no accident. It was a way to cover up something bigger, something that still hasn't been exposed. Lily felt her chest tighten. What was it? What was my family involved in? McConnell hesitated. "I can't go into everything, but I'll tell you this. There are people who want the truth to stay buried. People who don't want anyone to find out what really happened to Marcus Greaves and what your parents were trying to hide. The fire, it was a cover-up, and you've been getting too close to the truth." Lily's mind was spinning. Everything was starting to make sense, but it was too much for her to process at once. She had known something was off, But now the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. "You need to stop," McConnell said. "It's not just about your parents anymore. It's about your life. You're in danger, Lily." But Lily didn't know how to stop now. The truth was out there, and she was determined to find it, no matter what the cost. She had to know what had happened to her family, and why her parents had died in that fire. Lily didn't know what to think. Detective McConnell's words rang in her ears. "You're in danger, Lily." His warning echoed through her mind as she stood in her living room, still reeling from the conversation. She had spent years thinking about the fire and her parents' deaths. But now, with every new piece of information, she was realizing just how dangerous the truth could be. Her hand shook as she sat down on the couch, the article about Marcus Greaves still in her lap. She couldn't stop thinking about the details McConnell had shared with her. Her parents had been involved in something illegal, something that had led to Greaves' mysterious death. And now she was tangled in it, too, whether she liked it or not. The fire wasn't just an accident. It was a cover-up, a way to hide something bigger. She had gotten too close to the truth, and now there were people who didn't want her to uncover what had really happened. That thought made her stomach churn. Who were these people? What would they do to keep the secrets buried? Despite McConnell's warning, Lily couldn't stop herself. She had already come too far to back down now. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how important it was for her to find out the truth, not just for her own peace of mind, but for her parents as well. They deserved that much. They had been hiding something, and whatever it wasn't just dangerous. It was something that could change everything. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and there was only one person she could think of who might know more. Gregory Hall, the man who had given her the first hint about her parents' secret life, the one who had known something about the fire and the danger surrounding it. Lily had been trying to reach him ever since their meeting at the diner, but he hadn't returned any of her calls. She felt like she was running out of time. If she didn't find out more soon, the pieces of the puzzle might be lost forever. Determined to find him, Lily set out the next morning to visit the last place Gregory had mentioned, a small office on the outskirts of town. It wasn't far, but she felt nervous as she drove, her thoughts racing with questions. What if he didn't want to help her anymore? What if he was too scared to talk? When she arrived at the address, the office looked abandoned, the windows dusty, and the door locked. Lily's heart sank. She had hoped Gregory would be there, ready to tell her everything. But now it seemed like she had come all this way for nothing. She was about to turn and leave when a figure stepped out from behind the building. It was Gregory. His face was drawn and tired, and he looked over his shoulder nervously before approaching her. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low. Lily took a deep breath. "I need your help, Gregory. I need to know the truth. What were my parents involved in? Why did they die in that fire?" Gregory glanced around again, his eyes wary. "You don't understand, Lily. You're playing a dangerous game. These people, whoever they are, they won't stop until they've buried everything. And you're not going to get the answers you're looking for. Not from me, not from anyone." Lily shook her head, frustration building. "I can't just walk away. I have to know. My parents, my whole life, has been a lie, and I deserve the truth." Gregory sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked conflicted, as though he was torn between wanting to protect her and needing to tell her everything. Finally, he spoke. "All right," he said quietly, "but you have to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you, it's not something you can undo. Once you know, there's no going back." Lily nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't care. She needed to know. Gregory took a deep breath. "Your parents were involved with a group that was operating outside the law. They were working with people who had a lot of power, people who didn't care about anything except their own gain. When they wanted out, they tried to get away clean. But they couldn't. That fire, it wasn't just a way to destroy evidence. It was meant to end everything." Lily's breath caught in her throat. "You mean They weren't just innocent victims. Gregory shook his head slowly. No, they were involved. They were part of something much bigger than they realized. And when they tried to escape, it cost them their lives. Lily felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had always believed her parents were good, kind people. They had always loved her. But now it seemed like they had been hiding secrets that could destroy everything. Who killed them? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Who made them pay? Gregory looked away. I don't know. I think they were trying to protect you. They made sure you survived, Lily. Someone got you out of that house before it burned to the ground. But they couldn't protect themselves. Lily stood in the empty parking lot, staring after Gregory as he disappeared around the corner. His words echoed in her mind, louder than ever. You're on your own from here on out. The weight of his warning pressed down on her, but it did little to deter her. If anything, it only fueled her determination. She couldn't walk away now. She had to know what had really happened to her parents, and nothing, not even Gregory's warning, would stop her from finding out the truth. Lily drove back to her apartment in a daze, her mind racing. She knew that the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. But it didn't matter. Her parents had been part of something bigger, something dangerous, and it was time to uncover the details, no matter the cost. The next morning, Lily made her way to the town archives. She had spent the last few weeks searching for anything that could explain her parents' involvement in the mysterious events surrounding their deaths. But so far, she had found little. She needed more. She needed to dig deeper. When she arrived at the small, dusty building, she was greeted by an elderly woman who worked there. How can I help you today, dear? The woman asked with a kind smile. Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. I'm looking for information on a man named Marcus Greaves, and I need to find anything you have on a fire that happened years ago, the one that killed my parents. The woman's smile faded slightly, but she nodded. I know about the fire. It was a tragedy, for sure. As for Marcus Greaves, I'm not sure if we have anything specific on him, but I can check for you. Follow me. They walked to a back room where the town's records were stored in large filing cabinets. Lily's heart raced as she followed the woman, her mind still trying to process everything she had learned so far. She couldn't believe her parents had been mixed up with dangerous people. Her whole life felt like a lie. The woman opened one of the cabinets and started flipping through old folders. Let's see. Graves. Ah, here we go, she muttered, pulling out a file that looked very old. She dusted it off before handing it to Lily. This is all I could find on him. Lily took the file and sat at one of the tables to go through it. It was a mix of documents, some handwritten, others typed, but all of them related to Marcus Greaves. Most of it seemed to be business records, nothing that looked out of the ordinary at first glance. However, as she skimmed through, one page stood out. It was a letter written in a rushed, almost panicked handwriting. It read, "We can't keep covering for him. The truth will come out, and it will destroy everything we've built. If you're reading this, then I've already made my move. They won't stop until we're all gone. Graves is dangerous, and you're too close to the edge. Don't trust anyone. You've been warned." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat as she read the letter again. This was it, the confirmation she had been looking for. Her parents had been involved in something far darker than she had ever imagined. The letter was a warning, written by someone who had known how dangerous things were. They had tried to protect her, but it hadn't been enough. Is there more? Lily asked the woman, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded. There might be. Let me check the rest of the files. Lily continued to read through the letter, her thoughts racing. The more she read, the clearer it became that her parents had been part of something dangerous, something that had cost them their lives. But who had written the letter? And why hadn't they come forward before? When the woman returned with more files, Lily was barely able to contain her excitement. She quickly went through the papers, But nothing new stood out until she came across a photograph. It was a grainy image of a group of people standing together in front of a building. Most of their faces were blurred, but one figure stood out, a man with dark hair and a strong jawline. He was the same man from the newspaper article, Marcus Greaves. Lily's heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the middle of the group, was her father, David Dawson. She stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. Her father had known Marcus Greaves. He had worked with him. But why? And how deep had their involvement gone? She slammed the photograph down on the table, her hands trembling. "This is all connected," she whispered to herself. "This is bigger than I thought." The woman watched her closely, her expression now more serious. "Are you sure you want to keep going, dear? What you're asking for is dangerous. I've seen what happens when people dig too deep. They don't always come back." Lily looked up, determination in her eyes. "I have to know the truth. It's the only way to move forward. I can't stop now." Lily couldn't get the image of the photograph out of her head. Her father had been in it, standing next to Marcus Greaves and a group of strangers. The shocking truth that her father had been involved with these people, and whatever dark dealings they were part of, was overwhelming. Every new piece of information she found only raised more questions. But the fire that took her parents' lives, that was still the most significant mystery. The next morning, Lily decided to take a different approach. She returned to the town archives to search for anything new that could shed light on her parents' lives. It was there that she found a connection to an old real estate project that involved several people linked to her father and Greaves. The project had been marked by missing funds and unexplained disappearances. Determined to follow this new lead, Lily drove to the location of the project. It was an abandoned building on the edge of town. As she stood outside the building, a sense of unease settled over her. This place seemed like it had been forgotten by time. But Lily knew that the answers she was searching for could be inside. With a deep breath, she pushed open the creaky gate and stepped toward the entrance. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was almost deafening. She tried to shake off the fear creeping up her spine and focused on finding something, anything, that would give her more answers. Inside the building, her eyes were drawn to a file cabinet in the corner of the room. It looked old, its metal doors rusted, but something about it felt important. She moved quickly, pulling open the drawer. As she sifted through the papers, her heart raced. Most of the files were old business documents, but one paper caught her eye, a ledger filled with names, dates, and payments. And then, in the middle of it all, she saw it, her father's name, alongside Marcus Greaves and others she had seen in the photograph. The payments weren't ordinary transactions. They were large sums of money, with notes that implied something much darker than simple business dealings. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she read further. Then she found another note, hidden among the pages. It was written in hurried handwriting, and it read, "They won't stop. It's bigger than anyone thought. We've tried to cover our tracks, but it's all coming apart. Graves can't be trusted. We need to make sure this never sees the light of day. Do whatever it takes." This was the confirmation Lily had been waiting for. Her parents hadn't just been innocent victims. They had been part of a cover-up. The fire that killed them had been orchestrated to erase the truth, and it seemed that whoever was behind it would do anything to protect their secrets. But one name kept appearing in the ledger, Robert Trent. Lily didn't recognize the name, but it was listed repeatedly. Who was this person, and how did he fit into everything? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty building. Lily's heart raced. She quickly stuffed the papers into her bag and turned to leave. But as she approached the door, it swung open, revealing a familiar face. It was Detective McConnell. "Lily," he said, his voice serious, "I knew you wouldn't stop, but you need to leave. Now." Lily froze. She didn't know whether to trust him. Was he there to help her, or was he part of the conspiracy? She had come too far to back down now. But with McConnell standing there, she had to wonder if she was walking into even more danger. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the risk. The final pieces of the puzzle were in her hands, but now, more than ever, she wasn't sure who she could trust. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to turn back. But the next steps were more uncertain than ever.